So, hello. Okay, so hi. This video is gonna be kind of a brain dump on some of the things I do and think about when I'm mapping. I put a little bit of thought into this recently, sort of did some introspective analysis, if you will, on some of these decisions I make when mapping, so I'm gonna ramble about this a little. Obligatory, disclaimer, I suppose. I don't think there's a right way to map, just like how I think setting arbitrary rules for game design only limits creativity. I see modding as kind of an art form. You shouldn't feel limited by rules or restrictions, nor does it have to be super deep or have some sort of hidden meaning. I just like to think about the stuff, so in that same sense, I'm just sharing some of my thoughts. That's all this is. Either way, I hope this will at least be somewhat interesting to listen to. So, I guess a bit of quick background on me. I made the mod Conqueror's Peak as this Hollow Knight custom boss at the end. I believe it's probably my most popular map, so I think most people will probably know me for that. I've been making maps for 2 years at this point. Wow, it's been a while. And I think I've been able to kind of refine some of my design philosophies during this time. I made a video talking about creating atmosphere in Celeste mods, so I guess you can consider this as kind of an informal follow-up to that, where I focus more on the gameplay aspect. So in the title you'll notice I put modded Celeste in quotes, because I want to talk about a very specific style of Celeste gameplay, which is also the style of gameplay that I think a large majority of today's Celeste mods exhibit. And I say this because I think Celeste modding has kind of grown into its own identity, separate from other games, other modding communities, and even the base vanilla Celeste. I think the best way I can describe Celeste mods is that it's a very focused extension on a very specific aspect of vanilla Celeste's gameplay. There's a lot of aspects of the vanilla game that you don't see often in mods, right? Exploration, for example. It's a pretty big part of original Celeste if you think about it, but you just don't see that a lot in mods. We also don't see as much of an emphasis on level structuring, such as rooms that hide secrets, which hides even more secrets, alternate paths, or these sort of macro level puzzles that span across multiple rooms. Stuff like Resort. It feels like a hotel beyond just its decorations. It's the way that each rooms are laid out, it creates a very square sort of effect, like you're traveling through rooms in a building that are next to each other. 3K and Summit. Very vertical, a lot of overhangs, kind of feels like you're climbing up, the edge of a mountain. You don't see this often in Celeste mods. Most mods go from bottom left to top right, tends to be more linear, really doesn't consider structuring, and obviously there's exceptions to this. I'm making a pretty large generalization for the sake of example, but know that I'm not speaking of this as necessarily a negative thing. I think this actually makes sense in hindsight, because the thing that Celeste mods focus on instead is probably also the thing that most people consider Celeste does the best at, and have the most potential to push even further, which is the moment-to-moment gameplay, right? Madeline's movement, it's really crisp, it's really responsive to control. There's a lot of thought put into the gameplay to increase the leniency and improve player feel. The amount of speedrun tech in this game is pretty much endless, and the skill ceiling for this moment-to-moment gameplay is almost non-existent. Even to this day, players are still getting better. So of course, it makes sense that the modding community will focus most on this aspect. The things you hear mappers discussing most regarding gameplay is stuff like setups, unconventional unique moves, input density, entity reuse, new uses of tech. It's very much in line with why Celeste has such an active speedrunning community, or why so many people try to push what's even possible with the limits of the game. This is what Celeste does best. So the reason why I'm talking about this is because this is the style of gameplay that I want to focus on in this video. I love making unconventional things, I love trying new ideas, and I think in some other people's words, making Celeste not feel like Celeste anymore. But at the same time, I also like to stick to my roots, right? And I think there's actually a lot of things you can take away by just making modded Celeste levels. For me, I tend to have a somewhat procedural structure to creating gameplay. So basically, I start off at a very high level, sort of all-encompassing goal, then break that down into lower sub-goals, and then those into lower sub-goals. So we start off with this encompassing goal, And I ask myself stuff like, what is the map I want to make? What do I want to focus on? And a lot of time this aspect intersects with stuff like atmosphere or setting or, the emotions I want to express. But it can also be as simple as something like, I just want to make a silly map that's fun and it's hard and it's very input dense, right? So we have a goal now. Let's break this down further. Will the level have maybe several sections? What entity palette do I want to use? And this is when I'll start considering stuff like how well these things fit in with the setting I have in mind, as well as sort of the style of gameplay I'm trying to create. One more level down, now we get into the specifics of gameplay in individual rooms. So for this, my approach is to break the gameplay down into sort of pockets of generalized ideas. This is where I try to create a sense of progression from tutorialization of a mechanic, or maybe exploring a mechanic in more depth. I notice I focus pretty heavily on stuff like uniqueness and memorability. It's probably a byproduct of the type of gameplay I enjoy, being unique, memorable rooms that wow me at first sight. Finally, one more level down, and now we're at the part where we care about the individual moves, right? The inputs and the moment-to-moment gameplay. I think this is where a lot of Celeste mod talk happens. Ideas such as interesting setups, input density, or like really flowy gameplay. So yeah, pretty vague stuff, right? So let's put some of these points into practice through examples, my favorite part where I get to shill my own maps and talk about my favorite maps from other people. Hopefully, by the time this video is released, Expert Contest is out, and if it isn't, I'm about to leak my entire map there. Sorry, cast. For an overall goal, I went into Kingdom to Heaven with two main ones. Make the prettiest map I've ever made, and push the limits of whatever gameplay I choose as much as I can. Okay, perfect. Next step, let's break it down a bit further. The setting I chose was inspired pretty heavily by Castle in the Sky from Studio Ghibli, the giant tree city floating in the sky, abandoned by all its inhabitants, thousands of years old. So I crafted an entity palette that would fit this, right? Obviously clouds are kind of obligatory, and also at the time felt like an underused entity that not a lot of maps explored. I also chose to include things like dash blocks and crumble blocks because of how old the castle supposedly is, and not because I have a dash block obsession from playing Last Night, I swear. Now is where we begin room planning and breaking down the level into individualized segments or rooms that focus on a sense of progression as well as, sort of distinct concepts to explore. So first we have the rooms that tutorialize these new mechanics and typical cloud tech, and then we ramp up in the next two rooms with some shorter, simpler gameplay that utilize the newly taught cloud tech and some minor elements of routing to sort of set up for the rest of the map. I have a room with the purpose of introducing dash blocks into the gameplay, as well as the idea of canceling your momentum out of this little rebound after breaking the block, which is something I explore more later in the level. After this we have sort of this hub area where I introduce ultras, crumble blocks, another room where we follow this cloud zipper downwards and reuse it throughout the rooms with all these like pixel perfect crumble block setups, and then a room where I introduce another type of move, which is climb jumping into these crumble blocks instead of away from them. Throughout these rooms I continue to utilize cloud ultras, something that I introduce in this subsection. I think this sort of encapsulation of simple ideas to explore really helps me structure my levels and create the sense of progression that I want. If I wanted to explore an unconventional idea or setup, having, a set of rooms dedicated to teaching the idea leads into not only a smoother player experience, but also, I think, makes rooms unique, it makes them memorable, and sort of gives them an identity. I think throughout Kingdom to Heaven, I can easily describe many rooms in a sort of single, concise sentence, a sort of focused identity, right? This is a room where you gather a lot of momentum on the cloud zippers. This is the room where you cancel the rebound from breaking a dash block with another dash. This is the room where you avoid touching these crumble blocks so you can reuse them later. This is the room where you super your way up to cloud zippers, like switching between elevators. For me, making gameplay like this is the most satisfying, but I think it also comes with a caveat of restrictions or, ideas just not panning out. It's a way I like to approach making rooms. But hey, I totally get that it isn't something for everyone, especially if you value stuff like the moment-to-moment gameplay flow more than uniqueness and memorability. To dive sort of deeper onto this idea of room identity, I think here's a few other things that I tend to do when making these sort of rooms. First, repetition, I think done with care, can elevate a simple, cool move to an entire concept. Now, the best recent example I can think of that really exhibits this is Clockwork from Strawberry Jam. Now, Clockwork is a really popular map, everyone knows it, everyone loves it, but what I love about it in particular isn't so much that, it's readable or has great flow. I really love how unique and distinct each idea in Clockwork is, and I think part of that has to do with the way Fonda uses repetition. Take this move, for example, where you dash up from the bird to stop yourself from slamming into the slowly moving switchgate. Now, if this move was only done once, it would have been a pretty typical case of dashing to cancel your momentum. But repeat it 3 times in a row, and now it forms a really unique identity and concept, which is, stalling to avoid hitting the slowly moving switchgate. In a similar sense, imagine this part, except you only need to down dash once to move the fish out of the way. It would just be another simple momentum cancel, but we repeat it a bunch of times, and now it becomes a concept, where you have to down cancel as quickly as possible to avoid being crushed by enclosing walls. Clockwork is just full of these types of examples of repetition, right? Riding this fish elevator up, or maybe having these fish pop up in front of your face to launch you, spring canceling up these switch gates moving down like a staircase, or maybe this race where you have to outrun the fish chasing you. I can go on and on about this, but hopefully the point is made. An example of one of this in Kingdom to Heaven would be something like this dash block cancel room. Now, if this move was only used once, it would be maybe an interesting move, but nothing beyond that. Repeat it several times under these different sort of contexts, first time canceling with a down dash, then canceling with a wave dash, then adding variations like a cloud zip mover. I think doing this goes further as to give the room more of an identity as the silly dash block rebound cancel room. Another potential idea is having a single central entity, or like set of entities, that the entire room revolves around. For example, this can be a really big move block. The entire room revolves around this move block. You constantly reuse it, whether through repetition to enforce a concept, or maybe changing it up a little move by move to explore some idea in more depth. Or maybe these 2 giant falling blocks in Upturned Downtown that you constantly change the gravity for back and forth to allow you to move around the room with their support. First down, and then back up, and then back down again. Or hell, this room I made in Superfecta, where the entire room revolves around moving these 3 batteries in their correct positions as they slowly move their way up this spring elevator. UFO Nest by Goop Vendors, one of my favorite maps of all time, for having so many unique and memorable rooms and such a clean progression of ideas, and I think part of it is because of how well some rooms pull off this single entity for the entire room idea. Take this level that revolves entirely around this bubble bouncing back and forth between 2 springs and you timing your movements to it. Or maybe this room that has you reusing these 3 bubbles multiple times in various different scenarios as they slowly glide across the entire level. Or maybe this one where you have these 2 bubbles falling and you constantly use them to avoid the path of spinners below you. Some other things I sort of keep in mind while mapping are the following, and I think I'm just going to do kind of a quick lightning round brain dump here. Simplicity. I think keeping things simple is not necessarily a bad thing. If a room you make has 5 different concepts going on, then each idea can very easily feel muddy, right? A lot less significant because you're exploring so many things at the same time. I think sometimes it's best to get your idea across and just end it there instead of trying to drag it on. Sort of in line with my previous points, but I generally try to avoid filler rooms in the sense that each room should serve a purpose in line with my goals for the level, whether it's teaching something, exploring some new concept, or hell, even for world building and atmosphere. If it feels like the map would be missing something if I deleted it, then I know that I'm making the room correctly. Naturally, having new entities, mechanics, or interactions that players haven't seen before can be really helpful in creating memorability. At the same time, I don't think it's a bad idea to have a more conservative room once in a while, because, it's having that contrast of maybe a slower paced, more vanilla style gameplay segment, and then ramping up to new wacky concepts that can really make the experience pop. And lastly, obligatory, atmosphere and world building I think can very easily make rooms memorable, but you can check out this video right here if you want to learn more about my thoughts on that. With all that, we arrive at the final point where we begin considering the moment-to-moment gameplay feel of each of your moves, and I think this is actually a pretty expansive topic that I can go into, as there's a lot of different interpretations of what good game feel is. I think some might argue input density feels awesome and satisfying. Someone else might say the idea of having safe spots where you can rest, and the ratio of that compared to, unsafe spots that force you to move. There's a lot of discussion to be had here on what is good difficulty or bad difficulty, or if there's even such thing as bad artificial difficulty. Precision versus speed tech, timing versus autoplay, linear gameplay versus more open gameplay, so on and so forth. I think, though, for the sake of this video's length, I'll save this discussion for maybe a potential future video, but this moment-to-moment gameplay is definitely the most talked about aspect of Celeste maps among the general community, so you'll probably see no shortage of these types of discussions if you hang around people here. Okay, so that's my breakdown. It's the video. Obviously not everything, as that would probably take me the rest of my life to talk about, but yeah, just reiterating once again, don't take the things I say as like some sort of game design law. I don't know what I'm talking about. I nearly failed my only game design course in college. If you took away some inspiration for gameplay from this, great. Or if you didn't, then I hope it was at least an interesting listen, and hopefully I don't come off as pretentious or anything. Seriously, I'm just some random dude on the internet that spends all his free time playing this mountain climbing game. It's kind of becoming a problem, actually. Anyways, I'd like to make more dev commentaries in the future for some of my maps, so hey, if you're interested, probably don't subscribe because I don't know when that will happen. Maybe if I'm feeling like randomly motivated one day, like I did for this video. Okay, bye!